All right, folks, it's time for the next dramatic blog reading. You all judge books by covers. You could have learned this when you were 3. Don't judge a book by its cover, we nodded along, like we got the message, as they told us this as children, before we'd even read a book, perhaps. But did we get the message? I know I did, but others are only faking it, it turns out. They assent to the proposition. But do they judge books based on their contents? No, they don't even read books, let alone anyone's soul. For to judge a book by its cover is part and parcel with a whole worldview and approach. I watch y'all do it every day. You judge a link by its title. You judge a person by their face, or by their clothes, or by their body or their voice. You judge a statement by its speaker. You judge music by its notes. You judge a chess game by its outcome. You judge the whole by its parts. You judge a conversation by its platform. You judge an argument by its conclusion. They teach us explicitly about that one, guys. You judge someone's character by their company, desecrating freedom of association. You judge members by their groups. You judge groups by their members. You judge presents by their futures. You judge futures by their pasts. You judge races by their crimes. You judge nations by their sports or by their exports. You judge romance by its dollar value. Reductiveness and prejudice go hand in hand. For when we literally, quote-unquote, prejudge, we reduce, quote-unquote, a book to its cover. It is this literal sense of prejudice, quote-unquote, we must have in our sights in war. For it is not merely racial prejudice, which is possible independent of racism defined as systemic, but all forms of prejudice, or conclusion jumping, which must be opposed. For they are only different in how they are directed. The common psychological mechanism is one and the same, jumping to conclusions. A form of laziness at best, merely enabling hate, or at its worst, hate's prime mover, skipping steps in your reasoning when it benefits the in-group, like a freebie. Being stupid can be weaponized and symptomizes privilege and entitlement. This common psychological mechanism also links the various forms of social justice under anarchism. Feminism fights jumping to conclusions about gendered power. Anti-racism fights jumping to conclusions about racial power. Anarchism fights jumping to conclusions about power generally. And logic just fights jumping to conclusions. Simpliciter. So math will make you moral. Do your homework. Start here. I have a syllabus if you want to study logic. No joke. I'll help you for free. To see how various movements unite under anarchism, see my first article here. Oh, I guess this is a 2-for-1 dramatic reading, isn't it? The Anarchist Case for Polyamory. Questioning power doesn't immediately multiply your number of partners. So what's the connection via relationship anarchy, quote-unquote, between anarchism and polyamory? They seem maybe unrelated to some people, especially if they're not, they don't study anarchism or whatever. They think it means terrorism. Take most cited living scholar and coolest cognitive scientist Chomsky's big tent definition of anarchism as a, quote-unquote, tendency in human thought to question power, domination, even if you like it, hierarchy, and submission, even if you like it. Something like that. Taken this way, anarchism is not a position, but a method of questioning, not unlike the philosophical skepticism of Pyrrho or of Socrates, and originally inspired by Jesus, which also drives many a conversion from theism to atheism, and questioning of other social institutions, such as the church, establishment science, state misogyny, homophobia, institutionalized racism, and internalized classism, you name it. Taken this way, if skepticism became the dominant power, the supposed self-refutation of skepticism would have more meaningful political force. These, my friends, are the anarchisms, and they were scattered to the corners of the earth so as to conquer by dividing them. I call it methodological anarchism when name-dropping Chomsky is not illuminating, and when emphasizing the common method behind the good parts of various movements for social justice is at issue. And what are the good parts? Anarchism itself and democracy have epistemic arguments on their behalf. That is, it's possible to construe this collective project for our mutual liberation and recognition as still part of a larger quest for the truth, which, even more so than with money, cannot be possessed by an individual. If you held all the Bitcoin on Earth, you might not find a buyer, and if you held all the knowledge, you'd be the only person. Well, a person is a network too, so that to own them is to destroy them. So what's the argument? If this is anarchism, and it suffuses every question, what's its special relevance to sex and procreation? Well, you may have noticed people get controlling in sexual relationships. You've noticed, right? And that our dominant form of politics is authoritarian and maintained by people being controlling, which they learn from the sexual relationships which produce them as offspring, their parents' controlling relationships. So, since some relationships, like some countries, are more controlling than others, a natural question is, how do I control my partner the absolute minimum theoretically possible and never deviate from that unless I can justify it in explicit verbal terms? How do I do that? One could ask. This is what it would mean to be principled in your anarchism, to demand a verbal appeal to a principle discussed by the light of day which somehow justifies anything other than the least controlling approach to sex you can imagine, or to anything. Notice this has nothing to do with pursuing an additional partner or not. Therein lies the difference in the game you're necessarily playing when you're poly with one partner and when you're mono with one partner. You're mono to the extent you take steps for the purpose of reducing your partner's chances of connection, or steps which have that effect other than via improving connections, making other connections stronger, can affect those chances. This, by the way, is a definition of poly which I've had to argue for, but I have seen other people using it, like, what's her name? The sex worker who went on Lex Fridman, who does fetish research. I'll remember. Anyway, she used the definition that I'm giving you right here on that episode. So while there's no direct connection, ask yourself, if everyone were already taking the least controlling approach to sex they could imagine, and they had good imaginations, what would be the average number of simultaneous lifelong partners? Lifelong, we're not talking about serial monogamy here. To the extent that this number, remember, use your own estimate, is higher than the current reality, you've just proven to yourself the existence of a certain amount of controlling behavior, or hashtag relational aggression. Because you believe that people would have more partners if they weren't controlled. But nothing about where it lies among the relationships you'll encounter and participate out there in the world. You know, you've proven that there's controllingness there, and then you have to find it, because once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Right? Moral duties and all that. This pattern of inference is necessary if we're going to root out literally any kind of underreported and especially under-recognized oppression. And when you consider something like structural Stockholm syndrome, phrase of mine, I'll elaborate that some other time, you may realize that under-recognition is the norm, that oppression is normally under-recognized. So the idea that something isn't widely recognized as oppression, is that really evidence that it's not oppression? Isn't that the norm? Slavery was not widely recognized as oppression. That doesn't mean that it wasn't then and didn't only become oppression when it was widely recognized. Anyway. And don't straw man me and say I'm making an equivalence argument. No such statement was made. Learn about analogical reasoning, people of the internet. This is the quote-unquote dark matter of social science. No one knows how to talk about it or where it lies, but we're certain it exists. Not just, of course, the case of polyphobia, but all forms of subconscious, unconscious, underreported, or otherwise covert oppression. That was the anarchist case for polyamory. That was a link within an article. So as I was saying, to see how various movements unite under anarchism, see my first article here, the anarchist case for polyamory. Also see the history of anarcho-feminism. I really recommend that article by Julia Tannenbaum. It's called Destroy Domination in All Forms, which is the vibe I'm going for here, we should be going for here on this planet. I really mean it. Ending classism, destroying domination. Not just reducing classism, not just reducing domination. Now, in case you don't know how to do this yet, how to dehumanize and violate others. And while that's linked there, I've already read that one out. Stay tuned on YouTube or wherever you're viewing this for the next dramatic reading coming in just a few minutes. I'm going through the backlog.